All right, Tim.
Hi.
We're here.
We're here. I'm excited. This is cool. This is the stream within a stream because you are
Ooh.
streaming and I picked up on your stream. Oh, and we got a super chat already. That's so nice. And
Oh,
now we're
you got super
streaming
chats. That's
both of our
exciting.
streams to our socials.
Why has one chatter become super status and another just normal chatter?
Because they gave us money, Trip.
Oh, well, in that case, I understand. I just don't want to embrace that distinction as like an ontological distinction where it's creating a hierarchy of humanity. It's just a momentary experience.
Look, I'm
distinction.
broke, so I will embrace those things. Thank you. Thank you so much, Super Chat. I really appreciate it, Knock. Trip, I'm excited to be here, my friend. This is going to be a good time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I like hanging out with you. And the last year, Jeffrey Pugh and I have been working on this giant Bonhoeffer audio documentary series, which will start in like a week. So I've thought a lot about it. And then you made the mistake of sending me Eric Metaxas clips. And it was just so triggering.
One of my skills, I love this. It's like a passion. I love talking to my friends who are really brilliant. They are, they're scholars or academics. And I love giving them clips of what is happening in far right wing spaces just to see their reaction. Like it
Uh-oh. Tim just straight up froze up.
it sparks.
Ooh, okay. Tim did disappear. I'm glad I'm not the only one that had that. I all saw him disappear as well. All right. Well, we'll just let him hop back on here. But yeah, so this past he was demonstrating the reaction. This past year, I've been working on an audio documentary on Dietrich Bonhoeffer with Jeffrey Pugh, he and I've taught a couple Bonhoeffer classes in the past, and he's a retired scholar. So he's been a part of the Bonhoeffer community in the academy for years, and as part of the project, essentially we wrote a book. Then we did interviews with all these major Bonhoeffer scholars, and then all the places where we would normally footnote them, right? Like put them in, where you drop a little footnote in your book to them. We then would go interview them about their work. And so the audio documentary is like bringing together all this research from a host of different scholars right into an easy to listen to experience. And throughout the series, which will start in a week or so and run through the end of the year, we also have a online class that's going to be running during it. If you want to get to hear long engagements with each of the scholars, get to read selections of Bonhoeffer as you go through, as we tell his story and the rise of Nazi Germany. And then we'll have little reading selections and live Q&As and kind of unpack it and stuff with an online group. There's already a couple thousand people signed up for it, and it's donation based, like $0 to whatever you want to give. You can go to riseofbonhoeffer.com if you want to do that. And hopefully we're going to get Tim's internet working. I'm just glad it wasn't mine, because I wouldn't know what's going on. But we'll see. Let's check the you're right. Eric wants to know, does Tim have stage fright? We also have another possibility here. Perhaps Tim was raptured. And which really puts me in an awkward experience of being left behind talking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer in a stream, and there's no Tim. He texted me, so he's still here. So he's not raptured. Oop! I heard a ding. Perhaps
What the hell was that shit?
Kyle says it could be Satan.
No,
could
dude,
be Satan.
no. I'm seeing I've been raptured. I mean, yeah. What Jezebel spirit was in my router? My gosh.
You're being silenced by demons. I mean,
sorry,
this is
friends. My bad. Oh goodness.
I'm just saying that was intense. I really hope that you prayed over your router when you reset it, because
I will just say that I did have some choice words for my router, and you could call it praying over it. That's one way to describe what happened.
Well, the Holy Spirit knows how to translate the groans of one's soul.
Yes,
which I think with a nice exegesis is equivalent of going Yosemite Sam at inanimate objects.
Trip, do you mind if I introduce you to my audience, since you're on my socials, and you and I have not chatted in a little bit, and we have a lot of new people who tune in now. So friends, to my left, might be your right, is my good friend Trip Fuller. Trip is you're a process theologian, you're a Lord of the Rings aficionado. We actually met because when I first started TNE, I reached out to you to come on the podcast, and 2.5 hours later we finished our conversation, and you said what you said that got me hooked was when you were like, I'd rather be an atheist than a Calvinist. And I said, I love this guy. So we kept in touch. We've done several events since. We're doing Theology Beer Camp again. That's your event. I'm coming out to it. And we've had you on here pretty often. So it's great to have you back on my channels, but also it's an honor, of course, to be on your channels. And I have enjoyed sending you Christian nationalist propaganda and just watching you freak out. It's been a lot of fun to do that. And I'm happy to play my part in that aspect of your life. It makes me very happy.
That's good. I'm glad you appreciate playing that part. I mean, I have other things I like about you better than that. Actually quite a few, but it is an important part. And for those that that don't know, a few months ago, Tim, Diana, and I did a class kind of exploring different political theologies in an American context that was quite a bit of fun.
Yeah.
But if you want to come hang out with us at Theology Beer Camp,
oh my goodness,
theologybeer.camp, the URL's right there. It's gonna be a lot of fun. And you want to tell them what about your live show and stuff, you and April and
yes,
guests
I do. By the way, no offense, but whose code is Hobbit Cottage? Is that Diana's?
Oh, whoops! I can put yours on here. You tell me.
Look at you plugging my competition like that.
What's your code? What's your code? It's TNE what?
TNE Hobbit. Yes. While you're doing that, Theology Beer Camp, and listen, I know my audience. Some people are like, beer camp, like what is beer camp? Okay, let me explain what's going on here. First off, Trip is also a beer connoisseur. He loves his beer. So you started this a while ago where you and some of your buddies in academic world were like, let's just get together and drink beer and talk theology and nerd out in person. And over time, that kind of ballooned to like this thing because a lot of people who were deconstructing discovered you, and that kind of gave you a new audience. And so the Theology Beer Camp has become, for me, this is my 3rd year in a row going, this amazing time where not only do you get to meet new people in different communities who are all trying to think about a better path forward in their faith, you get to hear from top tier theologians, philosophers, all of those historians that can help put into context what's going on, but also help you stretch those theological muscles to think differently about what's possible in the world of theology and Christian theology. So like the first time I went, I'm walking, I'm like, oh, there's Pete Enns. I mean, of course, I'm fanboying because I love Pete Enns. I'm like, what am I doing? Just getting dinner with Pete Enns. People just walking around. Last year, we had amazing guest artists, musical artists like Flamey Grant and Derek Webb, right? I believe Flamey Grant's coming back this year. It's a great 3.5-day experience, hearing from world-class scholars. And what I love the most, I think, is that there is nothing that's like green roomy about it. Meaning it's not like, all these people are in the green room all day. No, there's none of that. They're just walking around like to get lunch together. It's a great time. So if you use my promo code, you get $50 off your ticket. For those of you who like craft beer and like to taste all kinds of beer, your ticket gets you an unlimited amount of alcohol at this event, which could be great for a lot of you. Now, Trip, you and I, we've done this before. I'm not a huge
Mhm.
beer guy, although I do like my sours. But you and I last year, it's in Denver, Colorado, October 18th through the 20th. Is that the date?
17th to 19th.
17th through the 19th. So I recommend it. It'll be a great time. The end.
Oh yeah, it'll be fun.
It's gonna be good.
Though
It's gonna be good. You got an
I think,
all-star lineup again this
dude,
year.
your internet wiggled, and so I'm just telling you, the demons, they might be for real.
What is up?
I don't know. Have you ever thought about getting a good internet, Tim?
Dude, I'm hardwired in to my router. I mean, I've never had this issue ever. I'm embarrassed. I'm
just glad you weren't raptured without me. That, like, of all the options, like satanic interference, that's one thing, but if I was left behind, then then Kevin Max would have to switch what songs he's singing at Theology Beer Camp.
Right, because Kevin Max will be there this year. That's right, from DC Talk.
Yeah, and there's gonna be a live T&E episode.
Yes,
April is gonna be co-hosting.
Yep.
And
it's a great time. It's just so much. It's so nice to meet people in person. I can't express to you how refreshing it is to be in a room with 400 people, and they're just hanging out.
And we're 600 this year.
Oh, okay, 600 people. It's just a great time.
Yeah. See, Simon here is like, you need to change your resolution.
Yeah, all right, Simon. I appreciate that, my friend. But I should have no issue. I'm streaming in 720. That's peanuts. Anyway,
peanuts.
Enough of that. So I'll see what
peanut
happens.
Butter. But anyway, if you can't come to Denver, there's an online version. So you can sit and stream it, and then you'll get the archive of everything as well. So you can watch Tim and April talk with Diana and Diana Butler Bass and Brian McLaren for the live T&E show, and it's gonna be exciting.
It's gonna be so much fun.
But sadly, Eric Metaxas isn't coming.
Oh, boo. Yeah, I mean, how do you want to start this conversation? Because there are a lot of layers here. I mean, this is your thing, so I'm happy to co-host and be your wingman. Like, how do you
wherever you
want,
Tim?
Well, the thing is, Trip, is that for people like me who don't have time to read deeply, I've heard the name Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, all over the place, even like, conservative evangelicalism growing up in that space. I'm not sure exactly, besides him trying to kill Hitler at one point, being part of like an assassination attempt. I know he's super influential. I've read a little bit of his writings that are really powerful, but I don't really have a good grasp of like who he is. So maybe we can just start with you kind of giving us the overview of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and why he's such an influential figure and why looking to him is so important. And then from there, we can talk about the people who are taking his name and really inverting it for really twisted agendas.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll give you like a little teaser of sorts, and you can ask whatever you want after this. But I think a lot of people first encounter Bonhoeffer in college. If you're Christians in a college, the likelihood that one of your small groups read Cost of Discipleship or Discipleship, depending on which translation, or Life Together is pretty high. And those texts are beautiful. Cost of Discipleship is where he does the whole cheap versus costly grace, where he spends quite a bit of time looking at the Sermon on the Mount, and that and for him as a theologian, he came to see the Sermon on the Mount as not like how he grew up as a Lutheran, an example of maybe what perfect ethics would look like, maybe at the eschaton when all things are set right. But so when we read it now, we go, oh, we're obviously a sinner in need of grace because we can't turn the other cheek, forgive without counting, go the extra mile, pray for our enemies. And the Lutheran tradition that he was handed was one where the Sermon on the Mount wasn't the agenda for Christians. And then he came to that belief when he spent a year in New York. Through the encounters with Abyssinian Baptist Church, which is a black church in Harlem, when he did it within he was studying at Union Theological Seminary, and there he encountered other Europeans, a Frenchman by the name of Lasserre, who was a pacifist French person. So and this is after World War I. So
Hmm.
like when we think of Bonhoeffer,
Yeah.
he's this person who grows up in a super nerdy upper middle class German family. He's such a nerd. He finishes 2 PhDs at 21 years old, and he's not old enough to get fully ordained or to start teaching. So he needs something to do.
Wow.
And he ends up spending a year in New York, and there his theology changes dramatically, his vision of the faith, because of these experiences that he
Hmm.
has. And so the thing about Bonhoeffer is that he doesn't come out a hero. He's an unfinished hero, and his vision of the gospel expands over and over through encounters with the other.
Hmm.
So like, for example, when he's and this is one of the reasons why Eric Metaxas using him kind of drives me nuts.
Hmm.
So when he finishes his academic work and he gets sent to be the equivalent of a little associate minister internship in Barcelona, Spain, with a German congregation there. This is, after World War I. There's rampant inflation because of the Treaty of Versailles.
Right.
There's the cultural weight of being a loser, right? As German, and they're experiencing this,
Yep.
and the Allies weren't great about this. Like, for example,
Right.
who of the French army is going around policing borders and making sure the Germans stay straight? They use their black soldiers to do it, right? So the economy's going crazy. They're culturally taunting. They feel left out. All of which has this resentment that ultimately gets channeled towards Hitler.
Right.
And he lost his brother in the war. It devastated his family, and he's sitting there in Barcelona, having just finished his academic work and thinking. And in those sermons, you hear him say things like, "I know Jesus says not to kill anyone, but when it's for your country," you hear thick nationalism coming out of his mouth, where he goes, "Obviously, murder's wrong, but what about when it's for your country? What about when the world's not as it should be?"
Right.
And you see this deep love of nation, of a religious vision for Germany, and this desire to return to something, where there was the kind of prestige and such that they experienced before the war.
Hmm.
And so this, for Bonhoeffer, it was the transformation through his encounters in America, encountering the Black Church, Harlem Renaissance, and such, that then he gets back to Germany in 1931, where in this year abroad, Hitler goes from the Nazis getting less than 2% of the vote, right, to then coming to
Right.
power. So this shifts why he's gone. His brother
Right.
sends him a letter like, "You won't even believe what's going on in the rural
Yeah.
areas in Germany."
Yeah.
People's resentment is getting rallied up by this Hitler guy. The Nazi party is going nuts. And so he shows back up in that same kind of this commitment of his faith was transformed because he got to see and experience a vision of the faith. But what does it look like when it's contextualized in
Right.
the life of the Black church in America? What
Right.
is it like to reflect on the person of Jesus from the underside?
Right.
And so these theological commitments he had were expanded by his encounter with the other. And so it's there when he gets back, he becomes active in the church life, resisting the Nazification of the church. People know about the confessing church and this kind of thing. He starts an underground seminary
Wait.
for clergy.
What is the confessing church?
Oh, it's the kind of so when Hitler comes to power,
Yeah.
remember, Germany has a state church. So when you pay your taxes, you're paying for the church, and there's kind of, well, here's the Lutherans, here's the Reformed, here's the Catholics, but the funding mechanism, your connection to the church is tied to paying taxes, which makes clergy, it's a little different to critique the state when they're writing your checks and it comes through taxation.
Right.
So Hitler wants to add this Aryan paragraph so that employees of the government need to be good Aryans. And it raises a problem. Like, now the government's going to tell us who can be clergy.
Right.
And so initially, just think of this. What happens if you're ethnically Jewish and you're a Christian and you're a clergy and the Aryan paragraph comes in?
Right.
Now you're supposed to kick out ethnically Jewish clergy from the church. They're like, bump that. This isn't right. And so the Hitler comes to power. He gives a radio address. And this radio address is like blood and soil. He says we're going to make Germany great again. We are going to return to the roots of our faith, and we're going to instill faith, freedom, and love of Germany into our kids. And we're going to reorganize society so they know that they're a part of the greatest nation in the world, blessed by God, blah, blah, blah. You know, he's just got this rhetoric. If I read it to you, you would think, whoa, are you sure that Hitler said this? Because it sounds too familiar.
Right.
And that's going on that very same day. Bonhoeffer gives a radio address, and in the middle of it, the radio gets cut off. And in that address, he says, this Fuhrer, that the Fuhrer is in charge of things, that the church should bend over to accommodate the desires of an anti-Semitic totalitarian leader is idolatry, and it gets cut off. He ends up writing and giving the talk that was supposed to be the radio address twice. And so we have the full transcript of the written thing after. But when you just look at this moment, right after he gets back from New York, Hitler's coming to power, you see two different visions. One, that the future of the church is tied to the future of Germany, a purified Germany and a purified church, where only, it's centered, ran for and by Aryans. And then you hear Bonhoeffer going, no, our allegiance is to Christ. And the body of Christ includes all those who have baptized into it. And oddly enough, there's neither Jew nor Greek. And how are you getting that out of the New Testament? Well, the Nazis found a way. They got their own translation. But so like part of what Bonhoeffer's attraction, right, is that out of that, there comes a movement. And the confessing church were the people that were trying to resist this. Over time, more and more of the country became either sympathetic or like silent bystanders. And the confessing church ends up waning in influence. He goes eventually to start an underground seminary called Finkenwalde that is attempting to train clergy to be faithful to Christ, despite the majority of the church being compliant with Hitler and supporting what's going on. Eventually, that's get shut down, and it's at that point that we're sitting there. Where his connection to his brother-in-law, who's essentially a double agent working in, it's a German spy leadership role as a lawyer, and a few others, that they start going, how can we end this where World War II ends different than World War I, right? That sets up for another strongman as a desire. So the assassination plot of Hitler and stuff in there, Bonhoeffer's role wasn't like trying to kill anyone and this kind of thing. It was he, in order to avoid military service, he becomes a double agent as well. And they use Bonhoeffer's relationship with the ecumenical church, like the church in other countries. They're like, we want you to go spy on them. You're gonna use your relationships to leaders in other parts of Europe in the church on our behalf. And then he's going there, presumably as a Nazi spy. And then he's reporting to the conspiracy back and forth between the Allies on the outside. And what he was hoping, what the people he was a part of, what they were hoping for, was that should Hitler be assassinated, that the Allies won't require a complete surrender, and that Germany, that Germans, the other part of Germany, could help reshape Germany after the war. That's what's going on. Some people know, like the Project 7-bit, and he helped some ethnically Jewish Christians escape. That's true. But for him, when he came into his kind of deep pacifist convictions, by the time he gets to the point of being a part of the larger conspiracy and such, he doesn't think it's like justified to go trying to assassinate or kill.
Okay.
There was actually like a significant transitions for him in the history where in some sense he's like, I'm going to have to take on the guilt of my country. At first, like there are these three transitions that usually get outlined in scholars. Michael de Jong, who's one of the greatest living Bonhoeffer scholars, says that at first Bonhoeffer thinks, what happens when there's an unjust state action?
Right.
Then the church can use its voice to try to get the state to address it. When that doesn't work, what happens when the church is ultimately compromised? Then We try to
Right.
have communities within the church that can embody the gospel and such. And then when the church fails, right, confessing church is losing influence and dissipates. More and more people are cooperating rather than getting thrown under the bus in the Nazi engine as it's growing. Then what is the individual to do? What does responsibility look like when neither the state nor the church will be faithful?
Right.
And in that place, right, is where he goes, I'm gonna shove a spoke in the wheel. I have to take a stand, but not because he's sitting there going, what Jesus really wants is us to go kill people.
Right. Yeah.
And so he gets caught, he gets put in prison, and less than a month before Hitler commits suicide and the war ends in Germany, they hang him in
How old
prison.
was he? How old was he when he was hung?
30
Jeez.
something. I don't
30
remember.
something. Wow, in his 30s. Wow.
I don't remember how old he was, and I stopped editing a book on him right before he started. So that's really bad.
Well, it is definitely helpful to get a big picture overview of Bonhoeffer, and also, just as important, the cultural context that he's surrounded in. You know, one of the a really great docuseries on Netflix is called Hitler, and it's a 6-part series, and it really outlines the cultural context and conditions that gave rise. And you're right, like we don't understand the connection between World War I, the resentment, and also the humiliation of Germany, all this stuff that was going into, right, what primed someone like a Hitler type figure to be able to kind of bring in this strong man, make Germany great again kind of attitude, right? And so this is interesting. This is really important because I don't want us to miss that, especially as we are in another cultural and historical moment. The more we can learn from times like that and what was going on in the culture, the more we can see when authoritarian type of movements start taking root in our cultural context, and then what we do about it as the church. I think what's really interesting here, and Trip, I would love your thoughts on this as someone who knows a lot about this subject. In Germany with the church, what you mentioned that like there was the state-run church that taxpayer money was used to fund clergy. Was there a real big push by Nazis to kind of take over religious Christian churches, for example, to kind of push their ideology and to kind of make them, another, I don't know, maybe arm of the state, so to speak, by pushing certain perspectives? And if the answer is yes, was it only state-run churches, or was the church kind of fracturing over this? Like, what was the culture like in Germany as this was all happening?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the further down, the more layers of the onion you take off, it gets more and more complicated. But it was intentional, and actually, that Netflix series I think does a really good job portraying it.
Yeah,
Hitler and the Nazi Party. What helped him come to power and have the kind of sweeping dominance was the advent of a number of new communication technologies, where having a propaganda minister and doing it really well changed things. The way he did rallies, would fly around and show up at places, the way they'd orchestrate mobs around it, the way they would orchestrate violence and then say that they're the solution to the violence that they're basically generating.
Yes, exactly.
So part of what was going on is, let's take all after World War I, this deep inflation was so bad they had to pay people at lunch, because if they paid at the end of the day, the marks were worth so much less they couldn't buy dinner for that night.
That's right. That's right.
This is how crazy inflation is. You're being reminded over and over by the rest of Europe that you lost, that your people, all those that died, are sitting there. Like all this deep cultural resentment, where now you just feel deep shame for being German. It's in that space that this propaganda machine is harnessing this real pain and this real anguish. And in the Allies, I think, recognized after World War II that, and this is increasingly so by historians, that the post-World War I treatment of Germany set this up. It was fuel for a fire, right? Like, so it's one of those like massive wildfires where if you just let all the underbrush sit there and you don't tend to it, and then it catches on fire and you think it's going to get fixed like it would if you were tending to it, it's going to get out of hand. Right. And so the initially there's this intense response and getting response in the most economically depraved areas of Germany. And then it kind of builds.
Yeah.
And when the cultural pressure or the cultural inertia gets there, then at first the bourgeois types, in the city elites, and Bonhoeffer's family exist here, right? They kind of loathed Hitler. It was not a political shift to think Hitler and the Nazi Party are a waste of time. They were like, he's not sophisticated, he's not smart, he's not even the best of Germany. Look at this guy. Like, he's kind of an idiot.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, and so they're like, "Why? We're not going to really worry about this. Look at it. Look, the German rural peeps got a fanboy, you know."
Yeah.
And it's not until the moment they get some power and they start to get a response, and then they can generate fear, so that cultural resentment gets oriented to action. Right? When there's resentment, fear, and anger that's sitting there. And you have a legitimate gripe and harm, and you don't see a future for yourself, and you definitely don't see one for your kids that you could ever imagine, that you couldn't have imagined before the shame of World War I. Then when anyone tells you where to put that energy, where to put that resentment, anger, and fear, then it can be contagious. And I think that the understanding just how intense that was. And then you throw on it the harnessing of new technology, propaganda, and they were strategic. The Nazi Party, every time they gained power, they would turn their kind of like they would turn different groups against each other till they have been in charge, right? So the president who makes Hitler chancellor is sitting there and he thinks, oh, well, this will quiet the Nazis up and then we can get back to doing a real job. Elderly World War II general veteran.
Right.
And little did he know he was signing his gravestone. And so things shift really fast.
Right.
One of in the interviews with a number of historians, that shift of where groups of people didn't take the threat seriously to them being swallowed by it. They pointed out how quick different groups were. One of Bonhoeffer's, that famous quote where it's like, first they came for the socialists. I wasn't a socialist. Okay.
Yes.
That's one of Bonhoeffer's friends. And he says, and he preaches this in a sermon, and he was like Bonhoeffer's friend and ally, but was like saying, let's be more moderate. Let's not just call it out directly. Let's try to work with it because we're in the church and they're part of the body of Christ too. And Hitler put a crazy Nazi in charge of the German church. Well, what happens is you put him in charge, and then Hitler's like, we don't need a bunch of little different area churches, right? So different parts of Germany had their own the equivalent of like a bishop, and they had regional one. We need one Reich church. And then they're like, we should change the decorations. Do we need that cross? Or what about this other one that looks really cool because it's got more angles on it and it's a swastika? Do we need to read this Bible? It's got too much Jew stuff in it. Let's get some quality scholars to go translate the New Testament so we have an official translation. I don't know if you could, a proto-dictator wanting a particular version of the Bible. It's wild. No one's ever done this since
then. Definitely not.
And so you're sitting there and so slowly, right, once the engine starts going, in essentially a year and a half's time, you got churches combined, a Nazi in charge of it, new decorations, no one even ethnically Jewish is serving anymore. They're kicked out of their positions, and we got a updated Bible where Jesus is an Aryan.
Were there any dissenting church factions at this point, or was this kind of like the dominant church expression in Germany?
There was dissension, but it was small.
Yeah.
And the Barmen Declaration, which happens rather early on, is the best example of what the church did trying to organize against it. And it's most mainline Protestants have the Barmen Declaration in their like list of documents we hold to, like you got creeds and this kind of stuff, and then you get down to in the Barmen Declaration, and in it, it's trying to raise one specific point. You can't call Jesus Lord and have a Fuhrer. That's it. Like it's like if you've been baptized into
Right.
Christ, you have an allegiance.
Right.
And
Yes.
it's not one where the distinctions you may make around male, female, Jew, Greek, slave, nor free, like this kind of this deep rupture of the identities that create binaries and we kill over. Our ultimate one is to Christ, and Christ bore a cross and didn't build it.
Yep.
And so let's just reassert to all the church and all the people in it what the call to lordship was, right? And so the when you think of these kind of moments of resistance early on, the Barmen Declaration is a great great example. It was the product of, I mean, it was a kind of a community writing space, but Karl Barth, who was a big influence, like a generation ahead of Bonhoeffer, it was deep. Like he's the inspiration of sorts for it. There was also the Bethel Confession, which Bonhoeffer was more involved in writing. That's pretty similar, and he helped write the original draft. And then they watered it down because they didn't want to offend Nazi adjacent or like people that insisted on moderation in the church. So they edited the Bethel Declaration that Bonhoeffer helped write to where he wouldn't even sign it. Right. So there were these types of resistance. There was this, but they didn't want to put it on Front Street. They didn't want to offend where then all of a sudden people won't leave and they're at a place that, I mean, Tim, you and I know this just from the kind of interaction we have with clergy, or think of the kinds of things clergy asked us during our class with Diana on politics, where you're sitting there and you're like, well, yeah, I'm at a more progressive church. So 60% of the people in the room are probably Democrats. 10, 15% are left of that and may vote for Democrats just because they don't want Trump in charge. But the others are like, well, I like Trump's policy. It was better then. I don't see what the big deal is. It's like he's like a plumber that does a great job, but he does no communication skills and his butt cracks hanging out the whole time he's there.
Right.
And so
but my toilet stops leaking. So there's that.
Toilet stops leaking. Yeah. And so while in retrospect, right, knowing what the ultimate, the final solution, knowing how ugly it got, you go, who the hell is sitting on the sidelines?
I know
when this is going on, but that's just not what was happening then.
Yes.
Victoria Barnett, who was the general editor for the complete works of Bonhoeffer in English. She was the historian that was in residence at the Holocaust Museum in DC. She's one of the people involved in the series, and she has a powerful book called Bystanders. And here's something that like gave me nightmares when I read it. She makes this point. She says, bystander isn't a noun, it's a verb. To be a bystander, to be the kind of person that's like, well, I'm not a Nazi, but do we really have to make it? Do we have to get so political at church? Or do we have to, do we want to offend our friends that might find this is how they express themselves politically, but they're still Christians, right? That bystander option, the more and more power Nazis had culturally, the more and more people who went from vocalized hesitation to bystander enactment. And she goes, the moment it's not a noun, but a verb, then what is the bystander doing? Their verbing is giving permission for the ugliness of the totalitarian, authoritarian energy of the Nazis to take over. And which people will hear it in the series, but it's just, I sit there like working on this over the last year and then think, you saw that the newest data coming out, like about how well white evangelicals are doing with Trump.
82% of white evangelicals as of August of this year are in the tank for Trump. 82%.
Right. But white mainline Protestants are still depressingly way too high. And yet I know those people's ministers. It's not because those ministers are sitting there going, well, he does have a point.
Yeah.
They're sitting there just like it's hard for us to imagine being a bystander or going for moderation when we know the end of the story where Hitler got, but in the moment, it was temptation. And so one of the reasons that I find Bonhoeffer's story so compelling is that the day Hitler has his first announcement on radio going like, let's do this Fuhrer stuff. Bonhoeffer's there going, I understand why my generation's attracted to him, and it's idolatry.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how many people do you in the American church do you think would have the gumption of doing parallel programming and saying, I understand how the deep cultural resentment and feeling alienated
Yep.
and such can make him seem attractive. I can understand when you think
Yep.
your economic situation's not even going to be as good as your parents, let alone better.
Yep.
And that you don't think you'll ever be able to own a home, have a successful career, that the shame of loss and all this kind of he's like, I understand that. But idolatry is not a solution.
Yep. Yep.
And so often
100%.
we moderate, we make people comfortable. And the other side of that is or we just narrow what parts of our life are actually subject to the call of Christ.
Right.
And Bonhoeffer's like, you got one Lord, and all of you is subject to that lordship.
I tell people often on our channels, if you I tell when sometimes I get real fired up and I say, look, if you're out there and you're like a more conservative evangelical, if you think that you would have been on the side of MLK or the side of the abolitionists, you wouldn't have. Like, look at what's happening now. If you're quiet now, but you think you would have been marching with MLK for civil rights, you're really delusion. You're tricking yourself. You don't really understand what it looks like to be or what it's like to be in that moment, because look at what's happening now. Right. And for you to have this position of moderate or, well, guys, both sides, hey, I think that they're both equally corrupt. It's like, you're just not paying attention. And honestly, that same rhetoric has been used throughout American history time and time again to be the spoke in the wheel of trying to stop civil rights movements or to trying to stop the ending of slavery, etc. I mean, it's just unbelievable to me. And you're right. And to be clear, I mean, I grew up as a conservative evangelical trip. You know this. I understand what it's like to be in that bubble and to see it through a particular lens. But once you start taking any of this stuff a little more seriously, kind of unpacking it historically, you start seeing patterns very, very quickly. And I agree with you. I think it is, I think that we are in a moment, and I always try and be measured whenever we bring up Hitler and the Nazis and how it translates to what's happening today, because I don't think that at this moment in time, Trump is looking to a new kind of final solution, so to speak. However, when it comes to the tactics employed, the rhetoric, make America great again, the attack on institutions, the blatant propaganda. I mean, right now in real time, right, 2 nights ago, we just watched a sitting former president parrot a ridiculous conspiracy theory that immigrants are eating people's pets. Now, we know factually that's not the case, but because of the right-wing media world that is funded by billionaires, by the way, that is stoking these stories up and is trying to spin these narratives online, Trump watches that and then parrots that nonsense, right? Which honestly, and we all know this, is a direct attack on immigration, which is loaded with, it's steeped in white supremacy, honestly. It's really just, you're one layer deep. So I agree with you. I mean, 100%. And I think that what's so important about learning from folks like Bonhoeffer and even World War II and World War I and the conditions that brought Germany to that point, it's so important that we learn from that to better diagnose what we, people who pledge our allegiance to Christ, what that looks like for Christians today, for how we engage serious authoritarian power consolidation that is happening in the American context and the propaganda around it that, thanks to social media, is flooding the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things I've found is that I'm not sure it's helpful, right, to go, well, this happened here, so this is happening here.
Yeah.
Because making those direct comparisons, one, it's not helpful if you want someone to listen to you to be like,
Right.
don't you think
Right.
you're
Right.
But the observations someone like Bonhoeffer makes about the soul of his nation and the way it was possessed by the demonic power of Nazi ideology, those kind of observations I think are more helpful because perverse, dehumanizing ideologies
Yeah.
are always a temptation to human beings.
Totally.
Uh,
Including
the
us, right? We're
Yeah,
not
yeah,
above
that's
that 100%.
yeah. I actually find it throughout this project uh, continuously challenged by him because he refuses to dehumanize the bystanders and the Nazis themselves.
Mhm. It's key.
Here's an example. I want to read you this quote just because
Please do.
rereading it, I cried when working on this project 6 months ago. And it might set it up. So 10 years after Hitler comes to power, he is in the middle of the conspiracy months before he gets arrested. He goes to have a little retreat, right? And he's a double agent at this point. And he goes out of Germany to a Jesuit retreat center, essentially like a convent type thing. And there he's going to reflect, and he writes this letter to his three closest friends and they're all part of the conspiracy. It's in Letters and Papers from Prison. Sometimes it's called 10 years after, because it's 10 years after Hitler came to power. And he's trying to kind of write a letter to state back out loud the things he's learned. And what he, and before I'd read this, and you read it one way, then I discovered in the process of this, working on this project, that the Nazis had actually taken Polish people as prisoners of war and put them as labor on the farm essentially at the retreat center he's there, right? So he's escaping Germany to try to get reflection, try to figure out what's going on at this moment in time, and he can't even escape the slaves or indentured servants, prisoners of war that are Polish people that are being coerced to work there, right? So it's like you can't even escape Nazis if you escape Germany for a moment. And there's a number of passages that hit me, but he says this, thinking about all the people who've gone along with it up. He says, the danger of allowing ourselves to be driven to contempt for humanity is very real. We know very well that we have no right to let this happen, and that it would lead us into the most unfruitful relation to others. The following thoughts may protect us against this temptation. For through contempt for humanity, we fall victim precisely to our opponent's chief errors. Whoever despises another human being will never be able to make anything of him. Nothing of what we despise in another is itself foreign to us. We must learn to regard human beings less in terms of what they do and neglect to do, and more in terms of what they suffer. The only fruitful relation to human beings, particularly the weak among them, is love, and that is, the will to enter into and keep community with them. God did not hold human beings in contempt, but became human for their sake. Now, when I think of that,
Powerful.
that he's thinking of all these people who had their own agency swallowed up in a Nazi movement. And then it's like he's sitting there going, you remember when Paul's like, while you were yet sinners, Christ died for you?
Yeah.
Like, if God does not have contempt for the most vile human being, but in fact chose them for the divine life in Christ, then we can't do that to them. Yep. We can't do it.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. Is like his observations are so helpful, because it's very tempting for me to do that to people that are being seized up.
Yep.
And I get contempt for them. I'm like, I don't want to name names, but some of them, we might have same names on our list, and others are going to be friends and family close to us. And you just have contempt. You're like, what the hell are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And he's sitting there going, yeah, we're not lying about reality and the ugliness, but the deepest reality is that there is no ugliness in a person that erases their belovedness before a God who chose them while they were a sinner.
Right.
And I'm just like, oh, Bonhoeffer, I know that's true, but could you wait to say it? And could you not make it so specific?
Right. I mean, exactly. And I mean, Bonhoeffer put it in infinitely better words than I ever could, but this is exactly why we don't dehumanize on our platform. I know you don't either. I mean, because people are made in the image of God. And the second we start dehumanizing the other, we are on the same path that we are trying to avoid, right? I mean, I ask this question a lot. How do we stop the cycles of chaos? Not by bringing more chaos into the cycle, not by pushing the wheel forward in the name of, well, they have to be eradicated, right? We know where that language leads. We hear it used towards our trans neighbors and our queer neighbors and our BIPOC neighbors. The second we start employing that language for them, that path always inevitably gives birth to violence and death. And we see it in history, right? That being said, to your point, there are days where it's incredibly difficult. It's very difficult not to say something. And I have my private thoughts for such moments, and maybe a private diary and a therapist, where I can just say the quiet parts out loud to get it off of my chest. But as far as what we do, a mutual of ours, a good friend of yours, Dr. Roberto Henderson Espinoza, wonderful theologian. And what he said in his book, actually, no, he was talking on a podcast, and he said, the question isn't how do we destroy supremacy? It's how do we compost supremacy? That always stuck with me. I love the imagery of composting supremacy, right? If we can invite people into better ways of being and compost supremacy inside of them and let that soil become fertile ground for new seeds, right? To be planted and watered and flourish for all of our neighbors. That is the path forward long-term, not destroying, not eradicating our enemies, but inviting our enemies into a better way of existing because they're beloved and they're made in the image of God. Now, of course, that sounds really nice. That's easier said than done. I do think that there are certain leaders out there who are never going to want to do that because there's so much money and power and fame attached to that. But if we can talk to our neighbors, our family, people who maybe don't have such a buy-in, right, and invite them into a better way of being, I think that is one of the ways that we can try and push for a better world.
Mm-hmm. And he also does this bit where that I found helpful. One way of putting it is like, don't attribute to evil what is really evil harnessing stupidity. The way he puts it is he said stupidity's more dangerous enemy of the good than malice. You can protest against evil. It can be exposed and if need be prevented. Evil always carries within it the germ of its own subversion in that it leaves behind in human beings at least a sense of unease.
Yeah.
But against stupidity, we're defenseless.
Yeah.
Right. And he starts to say, like, how did this stupidity, right, where it generates a whole community that gets swept up in this work. And he says, upon closer observation, it becomes apparent that every strong upsurge in power in the public sphere, be it political or religious in nature, infects a large part of humanity with stupidity. And he's not, when you translate the German, it's not stupid in like the judgy word, but stupid in the sense of, your relationship to reality is so twisted that you're telling a story where you're the hero in this and you're doing the right thing.
Right.
And so you're like seized up in it. And you respond differently, right, to someone who's in error to someone who's enacting evil. And Bonhoeffer's, I think, close relationship and seeing on the ground and seeing all the ways people were coerced and forced to participate in things, kind of points out that the people can get caught up in stuff. And if our moral frame is so individualistic that then to be a part of X that does Y, you are the doer of Y, misses just how social, institutional, systemic, and things perverse ideologies get.
Yeah.
And the ideology, the antagonism that was in culture that's expressing it is the evil, the demonic, the vile part that needs transformed. We don't need a future with our neighbors not in it.
Exactly.
And so like it's not a way of being blind about the ethics of it. It's just, again, like a different way of thinking. These people aren't the problem.
Right.
It's what stories being enacted in them, and orienting them where they're telling a story where they're the hero about themselves, and yet you see what's going on. And so you're like, that story's stupid. The person matters. Like it connects with what you were just saying.
Well, do you want to? I mean, I would like to kind of talk about how Bonhoeffer is being used by some people in these, Christian nationalist spaces, and kind of just get your thoughts on what you, not only what you think about it, but what a more faithful interpretation of the work of Bonhoeffer might lead us to think about in our current cultural moment. Especially because anyone who follows our channel, and even a lot of your work, Trip, is well aware at this point of Christian nationalism and just all the pieces, the people that we talked to about this. We did a whole series on it in the summer. I covered this extensively quite often, and I really do believe that in our historical context, it is the single greatest threat to democracy in America and really globally. There have been these authoritarian movements rising up in places like Hungary and Brazil that have been animated, as to use your language, by the same spirit of what we see happening here in the States. So what I was thinking about is I do want to talk about Eric Metaxas. I mean, that is what we titled this video after, which, by the way, when you're done, you have to fix the title because you spelled his name wrong, FYI. But it's all good. But I do want to.
I'm dyslexic.
It's all good. I got dinged for it in the comments. I'm like, listen, not to blame game, but I didn't make this live, okay? But I do want to bring up Eric Metaxas because he's very interesting. I actually first heard of Eric years ago, way before I got into any of this kind of work and any of this, because he wrote a very popular biography, we can call it that, of Bonhoeffer. I mean, it's the cover art is iconic. It's seared into my brain. It's a brilliant cover art. So that was my first kind of awareness of this person, Eric Metaxas. But as I got more into this work with TNE and the insurrection happened, and I saw this same Eric guy at rallies talking about how the election was stolen, I started going, isn't this like the Bonhoeffer dude? And since really over the past like 4 or 5 years, I've really watched him descend into a far right, I would say, extremist rabbit hole, partnering with people like Turning Point USA and many others, trying to use Bonhoeffer as the reason why we should be concerned about the Marxist agenda that's coming for the church, and why we should be embracing people and movements like MAGA and Trump. I mean, I know that is going to be shocking to some of you, but he really believes this. So what I wanted to do is, I have a few clips I wanted to share. I wanted to share one clip of him actually talking, and then also they made a documentary out of his book. I actually have his book here. It's called Letter to the American Church. I read this book all the way through. I'm going to read an excerpt from it later. But I do want to kind of share these two things. Maybe we can start with the trailer first for the documentary, Trip. What do you think?
Whatever you want.
Okay. Okay. Do you have your beer handy? Are you ready? So let's play this trailer first, and we'll get your thoughts, and then we'll go from there. Hopefully this works. Okay. Boom. Share. All right. Can you see this, Trip? Trip, can you see that?
Yeah, it's
all right, here
on
we go.
there.
Here we go.
I'm convinced that the American church has arrived at a significant moment of truth.
We are only 75, 80 years removed from 3 separate regimes that killed 60 to 70 million people intentionally.
The parallels with where the American church is now to where the German church stood in the face of the Nazi regime are unavoidable and grim.
Churches need to understand really what Marxism is, which is to destroy the church, to destroy the word of God.
So if you capture the seminaries, you capture the pastors, you capture the laity, you capture the soul of the world.
Christianity is not just about saying Jesus loves you and then going to heaven one day, but that there's a war that's raging.
The church is weakening, which is why Marxism is ascendant in America today.
This is the hour of the American church.
There you go, Trip. There you go, buddy. There you go.
Oh God.
How you feeling? How you feeling?
I mean, he's very good at fear mongering.
I have a few observations that are important for people to realize in this trailer. Actually, you know what I'll do? Let me just share the actual trailer. I won't play it. I'll scrub through it so people can see what I'm talking about. Hopefully you guys can see all this. I'm going to mute this. Okay. So this person here, again, I'm not sure how much of your audience knows what's going on. This person here, this is Charlie Kirk. He started the organization Turning Point USA. They did $80 million in funding last year. They have a subset of their organization called Turning Point Faith. Okay. Now we could actually spend a whole episode. I've done many, breaking down the importance of Turning Point and how influential they are. They really are one of the big groups kind of responsible for turning the Republican Party into a MAGA movement. For example, at the RNC, you'll notice that Bush wasn't there, Mitt Romney wasn't there, Paul Ryan wasn't there, but Charlie Kirk spoke from the main stage. So he's someone who is pushing this, classic kind of like Marxism is everywhere, look out, etc. And Eric has kind of been working with him. So Turning Point actually produced this documentary based on Eric's book. The other thing that I thought was interesting about this was watching them compare this is, I mean, there's just so many dog whistles. The WEF, World Economic Forum, is a huge, people think it's a huge Trojan horse for Marxism in a one world government. But the comparison of Biden, this is Antifa. There's a Black Lives Matter shot. And then there is like this is next after this, right? And then, of course, Nazi Germany and everything else. So watching them kind of compare the two and correlate that, like Black Lives Matter and Pride, whatever, and Biden are literally, the equivalent, or they're riffing off of the Nazi regime. It's honestly hilarious, especially when I tell you, audience, that Tucker Carlson, who's a big fan of Charlie Kirk, who has spoken at Turning Point USA events, who is loved by Eric Metaxas, just hosted a literal Nazi sympathizer talking about the true history of World War II and how maybe Churchill was the bad guy and maybe the Nazis were kind of misunderstood. Like, this is a real thing. This is a real thing that happened. You can watch it on X. So watching Tucker Carlson cozy up to people like that, and then watching Charlie Kirk be like, man, Nazis, man, we got to watch out for those guys, like in the Democrat Party and the BLM movement, is honestly hilarious and also very sad. So I just think it's important for us to have that context as we kind of go into this.
Yeah, I just don't. I mean, you might have more experience with this. I just don't know how. Okay, this story is basically like, here's a bunch of baddies in the 20th century. There are 3 different groups of baddies. We're just going to circle them all, call them bad, and then project on them anything we don't like in the culture war.
Yes.
And then go, well, if we aren't getting our way in the culture war in America, it's probably because the church is silenced. Of course, by church, they mostly mean conservative white people that are in the church, because like all the groups who are being signaled, right? Like, oh, state violence towards people of color, the military-industrial complex, the way we turned prisons into a moral, a money-making endeavor. Like, you go through all those little clips, and somehow it's connected to Biden.
Yes,
like all that stuff is the people who experience violence from the state or cultural alienation and things are now being labeled as the boogeyman, which this is what happened for the one of the comparisons what Hitler is doing right after World War I. There's this there right before World War I, the Weimar Republic is this big city energies coming across Germany, and then they get after the defeat of World War I, and they're like, maybe it's because we let loose all these new cultural values like dance clubs, and we weren't killing and shaming gay people, and insert all this stuff. So that cultural resentment gets harnessed early on in the Nazi energy as like, well, why did we lose? Well, it's probably like the dance clubs, the gays, the Jews, but not Aryans.
Right. Not Aryans.
And the true Christians are the ones that don't like all the people that we're scapegoating.
Yep. I have a few. First off, someone asked in the comments, wait, who did Carlson feature? I actually have a tweet of this person that will really tell you everything you need to know. I'm not sure if you've seen this tweet, Trip, so if you haven't, just brace yourself. I want to be clear. The person has deleted this tweet since, but it's a real thing. And again, you can watch his interview with Tucker. So let me get the window up. Okay. The person's name is Daryl Cooper. He tweets under the handle @MartyrMade, and he tweeted this earlier this year, 7/27/24. Are we ready? Are you ready, Trip? Okay. So hopefully, there we go. Here it is. So here, I'm going to read this out in case you post this to podcast somewhere. The tweet says this. This may be putting it too crudely for some, but the picture on the left was infinitely preferable in virtually every way than the one on the right. The picture on the left is Hitler and his army in Paris with the Eiffel Tower behind them. And the picture on the right is a snapshot of the Paris opening Olympics ceremony with drag queens featuring them. So the person that Tucker Carlson had on his podcast has said publicly that having a Hitler regime in Paris is infinitely preferable to having drag queens represented during the Paris opening ceremony. I'm not exaggerating. This is none of that. This is just literally what's being platformed by people like Tucker Carlson, who Charlie Kirk absolutely loves to work with. I mean, I have covered this extensively. Tucker is all over Turning Point USA. So that's one thing we have to absolutely call out. Number two, this notion, and I've debunked this so many times. I will do it again and again until I die. The notion that people like Charlie and Eric push, that the church, which for them is really the white evangelical church, right? Let's face it, Catholics probably aren't true Christians, yada, yada, yada. But the white evangelical church has remained silent. This is the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard. Like, does Eric not know about the moral majority? Does he not know what has happened with white evangelicalism over the past 40 years? Is he just like playing dumb with the billions of dollars that fund people like Charlie Kirk and other organizations that are all full of white evangelical Christians to push their rhetoric across? I mean, to give people, just to spell it out for folks out there, right? The white evangelical culture has its own publishing industry, its own movie industry. It has its own worship industry, its own church industry. The white evangelical voting group is the most powerful voting bloc for Republicans. Like, they are so active. 82% of them are voting for Trump. So what's happening is, to make it very clear, people like Eric and Charlie are actually trying to only weaponize the white evangelical church further for the MAGA authoritarian movement. And ironically, they're warning us about Hitler and using Bonhoeffer to do it, which is just, I mean, to any reputable scholar like yourself, Tripp, or maybe to Reggie Williams, whoever, they must see this and go, are these people freaking kidding? Like, are they for real right now? And the answer is yes, they're completely for real and they're well-funded.
Yeah, I mean, since the last year, I've probably recorded 40 hours of conversation with Bonhoeffer scholars, and the grand total of positive sentences towards Eric Metaxas' work is, I think one person said, well, at least he got other people interested in Bonhoeffer-ish. And so, there's that. And he kind of intentionally didn't engage academic scholars or want to engage in their work. And
right.
And what's odd though is the book has certain issues and such in it, and then there's what he did in the media campaign of the book, where all of a sudden all the interest and excitement and people that have this love of Bonhoeffer, he's in like channeling it towards culture war items. But this is what Eric Metaxas does with a number of his books. I take it, the William Wilberforce book. Okay, well, what's something that secular people complain about Christians for? Well, let's take one. Oh, slavery. Right. Okay. Well, is it inherently being a good evangelical that makes you, a little bit racist? No. Look at William Wilberforce. Now we're going to tell you his story. Assume that what he means when he talks about any of his theology things is exactly what a current American evangelical would mean by it.
Right.
And then we're going to tell his story to use it to go like, look at us. This is awesome. And now I'm going to use all the attachment to someone like him to then go culture warring. And he did that with Bonhoeffer. I remember him at the prayer breakfast going all Bonhoeffer moment, which is a phrase that has been used a lot. And usually when people use it, they're thinking this is a moment where our normal terms of enactment of response as Christian isn't there. Like, we can't just vote anymore. We got to maybe be a part of a conspiracy or whatever. Like in
Yes.
the late 90s when I can't remember the guy's name, when he shot abortion doctor, Methodist church member. He said it was a Bonhoeffer moment. We have to take a stand, right? And I think that's why earlier when I mentioned, like, for Bonhoeffer, first the church is to witness to the state on behalf of unjust actions. Then, with the state itself becomes utterly unjust, then the church is to be an alternative community that embodies it, taking responsibility for whatever the injustice is. And then if the church becomes unjust, then the individual has to figure out what to do. And the idea that process has taken place, or that somehow contemporary culture war issues are the most deep convictions of someone in the past, it's a bit of a jump, right? But but you could see that leveraging. And honestly, every time the church has done something ridiculous in church history, we've done it with Jesus. So, right, like you put Jesus' cross on a front of a shield, that's a problem. If we do this, humans do it.
Yep.
It's what's there. So, I don't really know. Like, he's just really good at doing it. And there's just like sloppy scholarship and things are wrong. Like, the idea that somebody who would animate Bonhoeffer straight up is like, you can be a Christian or a nationalist. You can't be both. End quote. I'm just saying that was not secret for don't trust Joe Biden.
Right.
Like,
right.
and so to me, that's but here's what the love of power, coercive, controlling power that's animated by deep antagonistic contempt for anyone that doesn't give you what you want. That kind of energy, which he puts it in spades, right? He straight up was moonwalking and slapped a BLM protester on camera. So that's Eric Metaxas, right? He was like, turn the other cheek. But what if you're moonwalking and you slap a Black Lives Matter protester? Pop! That guy. Okay, here's Bonhoeffer. Direct quote. Again, I don't know how these compare. It remains an experience of incomparable value that we have for once learned to see the great events of world history from below, from the perspective of the outcast, the suspects, the maltreated, the powerless, the oppressed and reviled. In short, from the perspective of the suffering.
Yeah.
Now,
sounds Marxist, Trip.
I'm just sitting there going, so if you were to think at a Black Lives Matter protest, I wonder who might have experienced something with incomparable value from learning to see the events of history from below and from the perspective of suffering. Would it be the Christians with Black Lives Matter signs, taking a stand and insisting that we reorient the way police function in the society so in-proportionate amounts of violence aren't done to Black people, and then shuffled into a justice system that perverts justice, eliminating access to the vote for an increasing number of Black people, of males, and that. Or there's some white evangelicals that really uncomfortable that they didn't say all lives matter, and that some of these suggestions for justice reform would possibly animate even more fear they have of the other in their very protected white spaces. So you know what I mean? So it's just hard. It's just it's hard to, within a straight face, think that.
Well, I would like to now quote Eric's own book, Letter to the American Church, just to kind of drive this point home. I did read this whole book. I've underlined much of it. Someone gave it to me, so I read it. And this is a real excerpt. It's page 48 if you want to fact check me. Here's what he says, it's about a paragraph here, but follow along. Let's see here. Where should I start? Okay, this is Christians. The word, this is they, meaning Christians, could not believe that the Nazis were devoutly anti-Christian and that they were essentially atheists and pagan tribalists working to eventually obliterate the Christian church. And mostly willful ignorance of these things, they blithely went along with the general mood of the time, feeling that was the safest course. Many churches hung Nazi banners and flags outside their churches and even inside their sanctuaries. It was a small but significant departure from the idea of displaying the German flag, which any German church happily would have done before this time. But healthy patriotism was no longer enough. So hanging the swastika, what was called the crooked cross, may be seen as the virtue signaling of that time. It may also be plausibly compared to when well-meaning churches today display rainbow banners or BLM flags. Most of them know not what they do and are only trying to sow solidarity with those they have deemed somehow disenfranchised. That's a real quote. Eric really thinks, in Eric's brilliance, that comparing churches that hung Nazi flags in their buildings is comparable to churches hanging BLM or pride flags in theirs today. I'm sorry, I'm missing something. I'm missing the dominant power of BLM, whoever they are, taking over our political system. I'm missing that whole part of the Nazi takeover, consolidating power, authoritarianism. I'm missing that 1-for-1 ratio. I mean, it's unbelievable that this guy wrote this book, and that dude, a Christian at Turning Point Pastor Summit, gave me this thing to read. This is what they're reading.
Oh,
yeah. Is right.
yeah.
It's upside down.
The funniest part of that is, like, when he was like, let's throw in the phrase virtue signaling.
Yeah.
Well, you want to know, as someone who has worked at multiple churches that have rainbow flags outside, you're not virtue signaling, you're safety signaling. Yeah. You're telling all your queer neighbors, I know that you could have come from or have encountered Christians who can't disassociate their love for Christ from their prejudice of you. At this church, you have all the problems humans have. Our sin, selfishness, pride, the shame we carry, all that stuff we all have and we have to get over. But you know what you don't have to get over? Same-sex attraction, right. Queer relationships, any of that. Why? Because you're a human. And we want you to be exactly yourself. And you don't have to hide it, repress it, or keep it quiet. So we put it up there. Not to virtue signal, but to safety signal. That's what it's doing. So then, because you want to know how weird it is, I'm guessing Eric hasn't had this experience of walking into a church, getting treated warm and kind, and then discovering after a year there, he can't work with the kids or pray with a microphone because of his partner. That's all. Like, it's not complicated why you would still, and is it virtue signaling in the sense that it is a virtue that Christians welcome all people to the Christ table because he even served Judas? So yeah, okay. If it's that, that's right. Fine. But here's that actually makes me think, hold on, let me pull it up. Here it is. This is another Bonhoeffer quote, which I would be odd to stick right next to that one. But again, he really wrote this, so I'm sure Eric's familiar with it. I don't know how he's going to read it.
He wrote a book about him. He obviously knows the quote.
Yeah. Now, also, you just kind of want to ask him who's running the Supreme Court. And you're like, anyway. So Bonhoeffer says, the huge masquerade of evil has thrown all ethical concepts into confusion. That evil should appear in the form of light, good deeds, historical necessity, social justice is absolutely bewildering for one coming from the world of ethical concepts that we received. For the Christian who lives by the Bible, it is the very confirmation of the abysmal wickedness of evil. He's sitting there looking at what the church is doing in Christ's name, rallying up right behind all this Nazi agenda, switching out their crosses, all this kind of stuff. And evil is masquerading. And every time it's being enacted, they're saying, we're doing good deeds. Oh, we're doing social justice. And And you just think, where is this rhetoric showing up in the present? Where's the masquerading of evil taking place where those who are enacting it have no idea they're doing it? Well, if you just ask the American population, like we all know who shows up as most hypocritical, and insert all that kind of stuff. And that's not even, I'm not trying to throw shade at him. It's just one of those where if Bonhoeffer in that very moment that, he's pointing to of what this transition of the church, his observation is there is a masquerade of evil. So all the language the church uses about doing good has now got applied. So we're actually the enemy of good. And if you just have read the scriptures, you're sitting there going like, what? WTF? And that kind of it'd be one thing if someone could plead ignorance of this, but it's just harnessing his legacy to then do it.
Right.
Where you're like, what weed strain is he on?
Right.
Where he's just writing an opposite day.
That is what is so unbelievable to me. He does this with apparently a straight face and a clear conscience. I have one more clip that we can share, one of our final ones, just to kind of get you even more riled up, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about it, land the plane. But this is Eric talking at some pastor summit about, of course, Vice President Harris, who's not running for president, yada yada yada. Let's listen to them, folks. Again, brace yourself. If you're drinking, maybe take a shot.
If we do not act now, the window is closing. Bonhoeffer tried to get the church to see this in the early 30s. He knew that the window was closing, that there was an opportunity to act, and if the church would do what the Lord was asking it to do, they could save Germany and avert the nightmare that we all know they didn't avert. But they waited and waited and waited. They thought, we'll be fine. The moment Hitler wanted the church to continue to be asleep. And that's what the devil wants, and that's what the devil wants in America. And there are many pastors in America right now who pretend that they don't need to be in this fight. They believe it doesn't matter, everything's fine. The window is closing. And I promise you, if Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are elected, they are going to come after pastors and people of faith like you have never seen. And I say this as a warning. You need to fast and pray for this election. Fast and pray for this election and understand what is at stake. Because there will come a time when you will not have a voice. You will be shut down. That is coming to America.
So just a few notes on my end. And then, you can take over on the Bonhoeffer, attempt over there as you being the smart man in the room. I just need to point out that, Tripp, as you know, and many in the audience know, I did grow up deeply embedded as a conservative Christian. And I did listen to talk radio almost every day from maybe like age 10 all the way up through my mid-20s. And part of that was because on the job site I worked at, it was on 24/7. I just want people to know that what Eric said towards the end about, how if Harris Walz get in, it's going to, Christians are going to be under attack like never before. Now for most of my life has been what I've heard every time there's an election cycle. I will never forget, Glenn Beck crying on the radio that Obama was going to destroy America. I will never forget the pastors that told me that Democrats just want to put people like me in prison because we're Christian. Never mind the fact that Obama was a committed Christian, that Harris is Baptist, that Walz is Lutheran. No. These people are coming for your Bibles. I mean, they cannot wait to be sworn in to eradicate your constitutional right to free speech and to throw you right in prison, right? So just watching Eric repeat talking points they predate me, even though I've heard them my whole life. It truly is shocking. It is shocking to me still that people believe that stuff, that people actually say that stuff, and that people buy it. Like Tripp, people in that room are thinking to themselves, that's right. If Harris gets in, I'm not going to be able to be a Christian anymore. I'm not going to be able to read my Bible. I'm not going to be able to go to see at the poll. I'm just going to be under attack. What I call it the American Christian Persecution Complex, ACAPEC for short. that is so embedded in these white evangelical spaces. And why it's so effective is because while they're the ones usually doing the persecuting of other religious groups and other people groups, for example, the record amount of anti-trans legislation that has flooded our American legislatures has been pushed by Christian organizations like the American Defending Freedom League and many other groups, right? They're the ones actually submitting the legislation that would reduce the rights of their neighbors because they're seen as a problem. Well, at the same time, crying and spinning propaganda that they are just one day away from being thrown in prison by whoever's going to be elected if they're a Democratic candidate, right? That is what is so unbelievable to me. Unfortunately, even though for us, especially being outside the bubble, it's so clear, for people inside the bubble, it's clear for them. They really believe this, despite the lack of evidence. It is uncanny to witness in real time.
Yeah. Okay. Here's something I've never understood.
Okay.
And
I'll try and help.
I had someone very close to me explain to me that Barack Obama wasn't a Christian during that election. And
Right.
I was like, well, his family goes to church with my friends and they're in the Sunday school class with him.
Yeah.
So what's up? And they're like, well, it's probably just to win votes. And I was like, well, so when they made confessions of faith at their baptism, what was going on? They're like, I don't know, but he's a Muslim, right? And you get this. Same thing when I saw this about Walls. Like, I'm a visiting professor at Luther Seminary in St. Paul. One of my students, after she picked Walls for vice president, sends me a picture of him showing up at the Lutheran summer camp where his college daughter is a counselor on the weekend that teens with special needs are there. And he came to see his daughter at camp and take pictures and meet the counselors. I'm just like, you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, if it's a long, deep fake, it's one where he has somehow helped his daughter have a connection with the church, that she's working at the Lutheran summer camp, and just to sneak him out before he starts coming after ministers, he's going to drive to this camp in rural Minnesota and go hang out with his daughter and the campers. And you see what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of weird. And the same thing that I was in California when Harris was attorney general, and there was lots of tension there, but I never thought that she was faking it on Sundays at the Baptist church. So, it's one of these things where underneath it, you either have to think the only people who are Christians are the ones that pass their theology test, and that somehow doctrines got switched out to culture war issues.
But Tripp, that's the thing, is that they actually aren't concerned about theology at all. Because remember, Dr. James Dobson called Trump a baby Christian. Think about that for a second, right? Trump espouses no theology, no theological convictions, and no moral convictions. None whatsoever. He has neither of those things.
He doesn't know what he needed to repent of.
Right, exactly. But for Dobson, Trump is a baby Christian. Why? Because he pushes the culture war that they want, right? And really that comes down to one major issue, that's abortion. Then number two would be, depending on the day and whatever the hot button issue is, either queer rights or immigration. Those are like your top three. And they just kind of circle the drain.
Pet rights?
Oh, well, right. Yeah. I mean, obviously pet rights. Yes,
puppy power.
Clearly. Yeah. We don't want.
All pets matter.
Yeah. All pets matter. Hide your pets. Hide your pets, everyone. It's guaranteed legit info to hide your pets. But I have a lot of people have asked this question, which, by the way, I will say really quick, just as a plug, I'm not getting paid to do this. This book here, Ministers of Propaganda by Scott Coley, highly recommend for anyone to read. It will really help you thread a lot of things together to understand how we got here. It's so good, so readable. My best summarization of what's going on here is this white evangelical world. It has no problem with internal contradictions. It has no problem moving the goalposts, and it has no problem giving allegiance to empire that will give them power first, right? And so what's happening is that thanks to really, I think the moral majority is probably the big linchpin here, but thanks to that, and then just the decades of reinforcement through churches, through books, through literature, through pastors, through politicians, through commentators, decades of reinforcing has created this Christianity that is predicated on you being in or out based on where you are on specific culture war issues, right? And then it's also a faith that will embrace anti-intellectual propaganda to smear their opponents if it serves them for the greater good. This is why, and again, I want to be clear, I was 19, a conservative, and I had the epiphany at 19 listening to Rush Limbaugh. I don't get it, guys. Why do they not give Obama a fair shake? Isn't he the father, the husband of one wife? He's a family man. He had the fatherhood initiative. I don't get it. Aren't these good values too? So it is intentionally manufactured and created to always minimize the major problems and antichrist behavior of their own political party, while quite literally making up lies about the other political party to maintain their cultural and powerful dominance, which is, and we can go on and on. I mean, Kevin Cruz wrote a book, One Nation Under God, talking about the corporatization of Christianity and how corporations got in bed with Christian thinking. We're standing on hundreds of years, right, of a foundation that's been built that maintains a hyper billionaire class and their power and privilege, and then has weaponized theology and Christian thinking and spun narratives that always benefit those people, even convincing voters to vote against their own economic interests. So there's so much there, but I think that's what we're dealing with now. And a lot of us, albeit late, are late to the party, are waking up to what's actually going on inside that bubble that many of us gave our lives to Christ inside of.
Yeah. These, I'm trying to think of a nice way of saying this. Okay. If you were to go like, what are the three biggest contributions Bonhoeffer makes, that when you look back at his life, what are the three biggest theological commitments that he expressed? The first is that a Christian's ultimate allegiance is to Christ, and Christ reveals what that ultimate allegiance looks like. And that means any claim of lordship or any claim of allegiance is subject to the one who died cross dead. Second is that he says that Christ is the mediating reality for all Christians' experience in the world. No matter who we meet, the face of the other brings with us the presence of Christ. And so from his early dissertation work all the way through, he said that the other, the encounter with the other is the place that we encounter Christ. And it puts the obligation on the Christian, on the individual disciple, is to understand the other's experience and to make the reality of Christ present in relation. Right. And you could hear that right where he's resisting having contempt for even those that are deeply embedded in the ugliness of Nazification. You see how he had this deep experience of understanding that this even challenged his Eurocentric view, right, through the experience of the Black church in Harlem, friendship with Frank Fisher, all this kind of stuff. But that the demand of Christ means we don't give any allegiance to something above us, but we always give it to the other in front of us, because that's where faith works out. And then at the end of his life, he's sitting in prison reflecting all this, and he goes, Christianity became a religion, and we live in a world where we need religionless Christianity. Religion became something that made good citizens and good workers. It became something that served a nation's output, generated workers for our mechanistic, militaristic relationship to nature and our enemies. like religion became the way we justified morals, and then culture could just seize religion and manipulate people for morals even against its own founding. He's like, religion has to die. Look what it's doing. You know, he's sitting in prison, hearing the bombs, the Allies advancing.
Right.
And so we need a religionless Christianity. And he goes, and half the time Christians run around not wanting to admit that you don't need God to explain the world anymore. The idea of God has been pushed out of the world all the way on a cross. And then he says, and that's where faith begins anew. And it is and he says, only the suffering God can help. So what do we do with a faith after religion? What do we do with a religionless Christianity? This, like the end of his life, this big insight. He goes, where do you start? He says, we start in the arcane disciplines, which is his phrase for like the sacraments. You start with baptism and the Eucharist. Baptism, our identity is one who died cross dead for the other. And that we're going to keep reenacting that because Christ shows up when you give yourself to each other and for the other. And then it's going to be the arcane discipline of the table, that God shows up when for us when we show up where God's promised to be, a place where deniers, forsakers, and the one that turns them in are offered the gift of the divine life. Let's go there. And he goes, and you know what? Maybe we don't need paid clergy anymore. Maybe the church shouldn't own anything anymore. Maybe we shouldn't demand respect in culture anymore, because when we own stuff and we pay people and we demand respect by everyone else, you know what we don't do? The first two. We don't ultimately give allegiance to Christ, and that allegiance doesn't turn us to serve the other and the outcast and the downtrodden. And fidelity to Christianity is not fidelity to a religion that needs pride of place in a modern nation state with a military. That's what Bonhoeffer said at the end. Jesus. Now you tell me how he's sitting there thinking about his freaking life, and somehow you're like, I love Bonhoeffer. We got to kill abortion doctors. We got to ransack Jan 6th. We got to, well, maybe if Trump doesn't win, we got to get rid of democracy. We can set the Constitution aside. You know, like this whole thing is, to me, is just nuts. Just think, I mean, he's sitting there going, he's famous for cost of discipleship. Because when Jesus calls you, he bids you come and die. But it's die in service, in love, in care, in acting justice for the other. It has nothing to do with making America great again. It has nothing to do with raising up some authoritarian leader who can coerce values of the divine through the instruments of political power. It means inviting people to a reality that you actually become alive when you receive the gift of the divine life and know that even your enemy gets it. And that nothing is more life-giving than showing up in your own life for the well-being of others. And that has very, very little to do with fear-mongering and going, you know what, we're, for some reason, have not got past having a two-party state. And so in order to get our continued power to grow as a minority in this country, white evangelicals, we need to exploit and fear-monger you and say that you know the party that large numbers of everyone who isn't white evangelicals supports, they're like Mao, China, Stalin, and Hitler. And so I know you're tempted to see your neighbor as a human and they might have a point. And maybe we have to work together in a nonviolent way to avoid the animistic, violent power of human beings when we don't have mediating institutions for communication. But don't do that. What I want you to pay attention to is how much you hate Marxism, Stalinism, Mao, and Nazis. And I promise none of them are Christian. There's nothing Christian about them. And there's nothing Christian about Walls and Harris. I know they say they go to a church and they might get caught in there. And I know the president who's gone to the church most while in office of all freaking time since we started keeping score is Joe Biden, but they secretly work for the devil. And so therefore, we don't even have to acknowledge their humanity. They have nothing to contribute. And what they really need is us to pollute, pervert, and seize the reins of a democratic experiment for our own well-being, because what God really wants isn't a people enacting the love of Christ in the world, being the first to serve, the first to care, the first to take. What God really wants is the world's greatest military industrial complex that stewards the extractive economic system to be guided to be guided by an authoritarian leader who knows how to play Christians. And so, like, I'm just sitting there going, like, how the hell does this have anything to do with Dietrich Bonhoeffer? It doesn't. You could just say, actually, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was wrong. Anyway, this is what drives me nuts about this stuff. Christians have permission to be like, Dietrich was wrong. We need churches to own stuff, pay their ministers, and I really would like a church that helps make us good citizens, even if that has us lead ultimately to not have full allegiance to Christ because we throw Christians in other countries under the bus economically and militaristically. You could do that, and that's a good reason to pray for repentance. But the idea that you get done looking at Bonhoeffer's life, and he's honest about the modern church's ultimate allegiance being to nation states, economic regimes that generate violence and death. And then he's like, we need a religionless Christianity. We got to return to the root, allegiance to Christ, which turns in allegiance for the other. And we're going to discover the presence of Christ, even if it means we leave behind the trappings of religion and the cultural privilege of a time where we were culture dominant. Because what happens if we discover when we pay attention to what the church did when it was culture dominant? What happens if we forsaked Christ, edited our Bible, turned him into an Arian, cut out all the too Jewish passages, and reorient the cross, and then rally people up for something vile? Like, Bonhoeffer's witnessing against that in his time. I don't think it's complete parallels or anything like that. It's just, if you have been seized by the story of Bonhoeffer, the idea that what that looks like is fear mongering, that if Kamala wins, the preachers, God know they're coming for you, is nuts. You're just being lied to, you know?
Yes. I love getting you fired up for this exact reason. I mean, it makes me very happy because we need that. And friends, I mean, this is why I can't give up on this faith thing. I mean, I think you just really articulated well why I'm still so drawn to the way of Jesus and why I'm so drawn to this Christian thing, because even though I was given this really defunct kind of American gospel loaded with everything you just talked about, there's something so much more beautiful and also, frankly, radical. I like being radical. I just like that. I like being that person that calls us into a way of being that critiques empire while also advocating for the other, right? And I just think that's a very compelling way to live. And I agree with you, Tripp. I mean, the longer I've been a part of this world and meeting folks like you and others, the more I'm just convinced of how bankrupt this world I grew up in overall really was. Someone pointed out in one of the comments, they said something like, something to the effect of like, where is it? I actually want to read it. And it's not a critique of them because I totally get it. But they said, where is this comment? It was really, it's something to the effect of like, evangelicals, they just have no love. And essentially they trade love for being correct was the idea. And in my head, I'm like, I hate to tell people this, but the white evangelical world largely isn't even correct. Like, they really don't take the Bible that seriously. They have a really unhealthy and I would say just wrong ethic when it comes to how we engage in social matters. Like, they're not even right. It's not like you and me, Tripp, are like, hey guys, 2 + 2 is 6. And they're like, no, 2 + 2 is 4, but they're jerks and we're nice. That's not what's going on here. Like, the actual theology that works through white evangelicalism, largely speaking, is poisoned way upstream from white supremacy, the KKK, colonization, doctrine of discovery. Like they're drinking from that same stream. We're just a few hundred years down from there. So maybe it's a little more diluted, but the poison's still there. How they view the Bible, the modern notion of fundamentalism and this literalism of 6-day creation, those things actually come from racist roots at the foundation of it. So to me, I would argue that this white evangelical experiment that's been happening for a long time, while not every individual as an ethos, as a culture, gets it wrong, on top of fooling themselves that to be faithful to the way of Christ is to be an asshole to people, right? And to fight against their legal rights, and to think that somehow bombing Palestinians is God's will because, we have an obligation to support the nation state of Israel because of our horrible, super shitty theology about end times that isn't even biblical. Like literally, it's not. If we were going to use the biblical word, people are like, no, you're misusing these terms, right? But who's at the end of that theology? Palestinian children, right? And our taxpayer money funds that shit, and then we have to deal with it. So this theology has serious, egregious consequences, 100%. So it's not even like they're correct technically. It's defunct. It's just a defunct way of viewing the Bible, the Christian tradition, allegiance to Jesus, and we need to completely move on and think about the Christian tradition by learning from people of the past who can help us better inform our present to create a more beautiful future. And I will tell you, it is not the slave owners. It is not the Bob Jones segregationists. It is not the Jerry Falwells. Let's manufacture culture war crises to get the church to vote how we want. It's not those people that we should be looking towards. We should be learning from them of what not to do. But my gosh, like these are the people that RJ Rushdoony for another one. These are people that actually still have a lot of life in the white evangelical movement today. And the result is people like Charlie Kirk and Eric Metaxas who think with a straight face, they're being dead serious, that if Dietrich Bonhoeffer was alive, he'd be calling out the Marxists and the Black Lives Matter and the Pride people in church because that's faithful to the way of Jesus. And that's where we end up today.
Yeah. So here's one of those things. Here's just two examples of how you have to be intentional to get Bonhoeffer wrong, to leverage it for that. Like the idea, the thinking correct bit. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's a whole lecture series on creation in the fall, where it's very clear he doesn't take any of it literally, right? So he writes letters thinking about, he writes letters about appreciative of Rudolf Bultmann, the guy that did demythologizing the New Testament, right? So his understanding of scripture and authority is in the way it functions is so not American evangelical. Half the time, when conservative Christians in America read him, they think because they say he's an evangelical theologian that it means what they say. But in Germany, that just means Protestant. Right. And so that would include like Schleiermacher, anyway, which is the father of liberal theology. So he was in the evangelical theology faculty because he's not Catholic. That's what it meant. And so they just basic things like he's not down for the penal substitutionary atonement, like basic doctrines. They wouldn't like his. And then second, he goes when he's at Union Theological Seminary in 1930, he comes in with this experience of being sympathetic to German nationalism, where he can't differentiate his identity as a German and this kind of thing. And he has this experience there. He takes classes with multiple Marxists and socialists. That was most of the faculty at Union Theological Seminary. Now, at this point in time, 40% of United Methodist clergy in America self-identify as socialists. So it was a lot. If we're going to go back in time, that would be an interesting point to go back into, where that many of the clergy are socialists. But he takes a class on the church and social action, where at this point churches were organizing with groups like all the civil rights groups, along with all the economic organizing groups. So he spent time with labor unions, with civil rights activists, and this kind of thing. He writes home and says, when he gets a letter saying like the Nazis are gaining power and this kind of thing, and he goes, well, you think the Jewish problem in Germany is bad. You should see how things are going in America, with how they relate to the black population. He gets back, it's going crazy. And he tells his friends that he was in school with in Union, I think we need to start an ACLU in Germany. An ACLU. Bonhoeffer. This is, you just kind of want to be like, I wonder if Metaxas has been making his donations to the ACLU. So the idea,
oh my gosh, dude, it's crazy.
His enactment is like, oh, well, let's organize within the church for racial justice. Yeah. He's down for that. Let's organize in the church for economic rights. Let's organize for free speech. He saw that coming alive in the American church in his experience in the Black church at Abyssinian Baptist Church. He saw understanding how does Christ sound when the Christ is black, as it shows up in Harlem Renaissance art. Then all of a sudden, this same language that he had in Germany just sounds different when your Christ isn't an Aryan one. And so he comes back and it's so different. And I think that experience that Bonhoeffer had is one that showed up not because he read the ideas, but because he became best friends. And he fell in love with the Black church. He served there for 6 months. He went to women's Bible study on a regular basis at the church. His buddy Frank Fisher, and it takes him down to D.C. to go to Howard University and encounter. And he comes back with a whole bibliography of like W.E. Du Bois, this kind of Langston Hughes, the figures of the Harlem Renaissance. He comes back with the music of Black spirituals. And he said, in Germany and in the white churches in America, they use the words of the gospel, but I never heard it preached. But when I went to Abyssinian Baptist Church, a church that was honest about the suffering in the world, but they found solidarity through the suffering of Christ, then I discovered the joy of the gospel. And he says in letters later, thinking back on this, he said, I came to America as a theologian, but it was there I became a Christian. There I became a Christian. And in the Black church, experiencing the Harlem Renaissance, that transformation, right? Thinking back to the quote I said before, like learning to see from below. Right. That is not reflected in what Metaxas is doing. You can't show up and slap a protester at a Trump gathering in D.C. and think I took time to understand the perspective of below. Right? So that's why that to me is why I just like the moment he starts leveraging Bonhoeffer's name, I'm like, really? That guy? A guy who started out as a German nationalist, a guy who started out saying, I can justify war and violence not being murder if it's standing up for your nation. And then he goes and has this encounter and he repents of it. And then he calls out Hitler. And then, you have to get that transformation. He had a conversion, and he says that his faith went from the phraseological to the real. And I think that that line you said, someone mentioned in the chat, like they'd rather be right.
Yeah.
That Bonhoeffer had that. He was, if you finish 2 dissertations at 21, you're a nerd. Like you're smart. He said his whole life he had to repent of the pride he had in every room because he never went in one he didn't think he was the smartest. But he also,
at least he's honest.
Yeah. But so it wasn't even the ideas that changed him. It was the relationship and friendships that helped him learn to see the world from a different place that occasioned his repentance and then energized. When I mentioned at the beginning, right, like after he gets back, you have the confessing church movement. People are trying to move against it. It starts to dissipate. They start the underground seminary there, which is what Life Together, his book Life Together, is kind of based on. In the book, you hear a lot of the spiritual disciplines and reflection on the nature of Christian community and stuff. But when you read more narratives of what happened there, the other element was deep play. Like he would get everyone to go play games. They'd sing and tell stories at night. They would have all sorts of fun. And here's one of the things he discovered is that at a time where the culture of your nation has become seized, possessed, and at a time where the church can't find a backbone, it is hard to be a disciple alone. And so he wanted in that experience to have a community that formed in deep friendship, deep relationships that understood what Christ was calling us to, so you can hold each other accountable, hold each other up, and encourage each other as you go to face down powers that have seized the minds of Christ's body, and they don't know what they do, right? And what was it that he taught them all to sing? The spirituals that he learned at Abyssinian Baptist Church. He taught them the black church hymns, the gospel songs, and then he told stories of what preaching sounds like when there's not a gap between the identity of Christ and the identity of those suffering.
And
he makes
as
the
we can see,
recognition. He made a recognition. They have an opportunity with privilege to choose suffering, but there are people whose situation means it's not chosen. And if you want to know where
Yes.
Christ is, it's choosing solidarity for those suffering unjustly that cannot choose otherwise.
Suffering unjustly, just like Eric Metaxas and Charlie Kirk. They're suffering hard for the gospel. Clearly. Which is why Eric loves Bonhoeffer so much, because solidarity.
Yeah, well, if you know any of your friends that read that book
geez.
and are predisposed to like Bonhoeffer, then you can tell them.
I
You can
will.
say, go to riseofbonhoeffer.com. Don't even tell them that. There's just be like, when our friend Tripp, we're producing this audio documentary with all the heads of the Bonhoeffer scholarship and everything is being wove together. You just get to listen to it. It's really cool. I know you love Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And then they might come back to you and go, well, did you know that Bonhoeffer said you can't be a Christian and a nationalist at the same time? Did you know that?
When does this stuff come out? Like, when does this series come out? When's all that come out?
In the next week, I think.
That's
in like a
exciting.
week. So like the audio documentary will start, and there'll be 8 episodes. Basically, it's going to run through Christmas, where there's an episode 1 week, and then anyone that joins up in the class the next week, there'll be a whole long interview with one of the Bonhoeffer scholars you'll get on Monday, and then on Thursday, Jeff Pugh and I are going to get on. We'll do like Q&A stuff, do more like how's it relate to the present, those kind of questions, and then we've pulled together little selections from Bonhoeffer that follow the timeline. Because here's the cool thing about it is like where he starts, like this sounds more like Eric Metaxas. Okay, this is like why like before he comes to Jesus, is where you get something like this. This is him preaching before he goes to New York. War is nothing but murder. War is a crime. No Christian can go to war. This case seems entirely clear and convincing, yet it suffers at a central issue. I wonder what this issue is. It is not concrete, and as a result, does not look unto the depths of Christian decision. It invokes the commandment not to kill and believes that the commandment is to be the solution. And then he goes on and says, since it's not really that practical, I will take up arms with the terrible knowledge of doing something horrible, yet knowing I can do no other. I'll defend my brother, mother, people, and yet I know that I can do so only by spilling blood. But the love for my people, he means Germans, will sanctify murder and sanctify war. That's what he says. And then the next year he's in New York. And after that, he's like, Jesus wasn't lying when he gave the Sermon on the Mount.
Wow.
And I just want you to know, it's before he wrote any of the things like Cost of Discipleship, Life Together, Ethics, Letters and Papers. All that happens after this. And so one of the cool things of telling his story is he's not some like hero where the only thing we know about him is these beautiful little highlights at the end of his life. But he actually was understood and was so warped into this picture, leaves it, and through his encounters in America with the oppressed here, comes home and goes, oh, junk. I was on the wrong side of history. My allegiance to Christ isn't an allegiance to nation, and it isn't an allegiance to purity and blood.
Right.
And so that's the cool thing I think about getting to tell the story is without any reference to stuff going on, so many people from every theological perspective in the church loves Bonhoeffer. But if we pay attention to his story, he is confronted by the gospel in the face of the other multiple times, and he grows.
Yeah.
And I think that's my hope when I think of so many Christians in the present who can't imagine following Christ involving care for our neighbors, our non-human neighbors in the planet, caring for justice and life of Palestinians, people on the other side of a military, the things our military purchased. Like we start that. He started that way.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't stop. And if Bonhoeffer can come to Jesus, then maybe we can as a nation and as a church.
Yeah.
And so telling the story, I think, is kind of like a invitation of sorts.
I love that. I'm excited for the class to start. I'm excited to actually listen to the documentary on audio as well. I think it's so important now more than ever that people, especially people who are maybe deconstructing or kind of leaving this white evangelicalism behind, so much of that world is so ahistorical, and having folks like yourself who have put this together to kind of get some clearer just a clearer vision of history and what's actually going on with some of these characters that maybe we know a little bit about, I think will only help. So I'm pumped, dude. It's gonna be a great time.
Oh yeah.
Woo.
Almost as much fun as coming to Theology Beer Camp.
Hey, yeah. That's gonna be a great time too. I mean, we're about 2 months away. No, 1 month away. Sorry, 1 month. My bad. Yeah. It's gonna be great. I mean, honestly, the lineup is amazing. Brian McLaren, Diana Butler-Bass. You have some other folks we're working on that we can't announce yet. Adam Clark, so many folks, and tons of podcasts. I mean, every podcast that you probably know of in the world of theology and Christianity, are, all the ones that are more progressive anyway, or evangelical, are going to be there. It's just a great time. And also, I will say, I do love meeting people from the community of any sort in person. It makes it so much more personal, for sure. Someone asked, how can they follow you, Trip? I guess they're watching on my YouTube. Where can you be found? What is your handle on all the socials?
Trip Fuller with
No,
2 P's.
Homebrewed, right? Isn't that you?
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. On Homebrewed Christianity is the podcast and YouTube channel and all that.
I put it in the
stuff.
chat. People can go to it.
Okay. Yeah. So
wow.
tripfuller.com is my website. The stuff for Beer Camp is theologybeer.camp. And if you want to do the Bonhoeffer stuff, it's riseofbonhoeffer.com.
Right, that's the Rise of Bonhoeffer.com. Okay, cool. Done.
Yeah.
Wow, only 2 hours, a short stream.
Wow. Do what I can.
Well,
at the beginning, you were taunting me. You were like, there's no way we'll be done in under 2.5 hours. So,
well, last time I did a live with Kevin Carnahan responding to a Christian nationalist sermon. That was a 3-hour long live. It actually did really well. It has like 60,000 views on YouTube because people, for some reason, people love to hear other people talk on YouTube and they like long form, which is cool. I'm not knocking it. But yeah, that was a 3-hour long live and it's one of my most viewed ever, which is just crazy to me. So anyway.
I did like 3 hours just on the Tom Bombadil of Rings of Power last week.
Of course you did. There will be a whole podcast for Lord of the Rings, right? At Beer Camp.
Yeah. Brian's on and is going to be a part of it.
I love that.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
It's going to be
fun because there's different stages. No one is forced into Lord of the Rings sessions.
Yes,
there are people that do. I also had special cigars blended for the event, and they may have Lord of the Ring inspired artwork on it.
That'll be cool. Looking forward to that.
All righty.
Sweet.